Good evening, everybody. This is Humulos here to bring you yet another episode of Zelda Matters, and joining me today is Joshua.
Hey.
And so we just had a really big announcement this past week. We found out about a lot of new gameplay details with Zelda Wii U, and so there's a lot to talk about today. So if you have had any questions or any comments you want to have brought up about Zelda Wii U, call in, let us know what they are. We'd love to hear what your thoughts on it. We posted a video a few days ago showing a lot of our thoughts about it, but obviously we'll miss a few things. So we want to hear what you guys think, and if you have any other Zelda-related questions, we'll want to hear those as well. So, Joshua, did you ever get into timeline theorizing back in the day?
Some. Not as much as other people might have, but I'm familiar with it.
Gotcha. Well, myself, I was pretty big into it. It was a thing that I really enjoyed, and the thing is, though, is that it kind of stopped being as exciting once they revealed Hyrule Historia, and kind of there wasn't any room for discussion anymore. There was just, okay, here's the timeline. It's really weird, but all right, that's fine. So Link Between Worlds came out after that, and that was pretty obvious. Takes place after Link the Past. All right, good there. But now we have a new Zelda game out, and a new chance to decide where it gets placed. And we received a few questions about that. So we have a question here from Seth Havoc, and Joshua, can you tell us a little bit, sum up what his question is here?
Well, Seth Havoc is talking about how he believes it's after Skyward Sword because of some of the similarities, in particular the sailcloth, and how the world is still one large world before the wars, apparently, that would separate Hyrule. And then he mentioned that the character was not Link, and that they used some technology with that exploding arrow that is similar to the technology shown with in the Lanayru Desert in Skyward Sword.
Gotcha. So, just from your own personal opinion, what do you think about that?
I don't think it fits. I don't think the developers choose items based off of the story necessarily. I think it's all from a gameplay perspective, and I think that a sailcloth is just a piece of cloth. And then as far as the size of the world, I mean, that can go lots of ways. I mean, I think you can fit a big world in just about anywhere in the timeline. We know for a fact now the character is Link. They called him Link in the latest gameplay trailer.
Yes.
The technology argument's a little more interesting about the arrow because there are some similarities there. I've heard similarities to this time shift stones in particular. So that one's a little harder to say. It's just not right from the get-go. But I'm not convinced that it's anywhere related to Skyward Sword, really.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, I agree with a bunch of that. I mean, first of all, Link, the whole thing about Link not being Link, that was just more so rumors that got blown out from a quote way back when, but that was debunked. We are actually dealing with Link in this game. And as far as similarities between games go, a lot of them have similarities that may seem super strong, but just don't quite place it necessarily. My biggest thing with that was Four Swords Adventures. I mean, the game was pretty much a huge homage to A Link to the Past, and yet it turned out to be not even in the same timeline as A Link to the Past. That being said, however...
They've said about Four Swords Adventures that it was intended to be a prequel to A Link to the Past and was shifted mid-development to be something completely different. So, I mean, I think that the leftover remains of the world looking similar is from that, where it was previously meant to be the Seal War and ended up being something completely new instead.
Yeah, exactly. Now, that being said, however, personally, I do feel that this game takes place pretty close to Skyward Sword, at least as far as relative on the timeline goes. I suspect personally that it takes place afterwards, largely because we know that there weren't humans on the surface at the time of Skyward Sword. There was not a big population. Because of that, I am pretty sure that may be related in some way. I can't say pretty sure. I mean, it could be anything. But either way, we don't see a lot of humans in the gameplay demo. We don't see a lot of people. I think we saw one goat herder in the the original trailer. But otherwise, it seems like a pretty empty world, which would fit into a world that's just being inhabited. Now, of course, back in the day, myself and Hombre de Mundo used to talk about these things a lot on our podcast, and so we're going to have him actually come in now and share what he thinks about this, about the timeline. How's it going, hombre?
All right, there we go. Hi. So yeah, I had this discussion with Seth Havoc about the timeline, and this is actually something that got a bit more attention than I thought it would. Mainly because I didn't see anything that would tie Zelda U to the timeline or the story. But we got a bunch of people asking about it, and we got a on the Twitter question from Jasmine Saucedo. I'm sorry for butchering your name there. Who asks, where do you think the new Zelda game takes place in the timeline? So a lot of people, like you said already, think Skyward Sword, but like Joshua said, I'm pretty sure the sailcloth just means like they like that item. If you look at the sailcloth, how it works in the game, it works more like the Deku Leaf from the Wind Waker. But I just think, well, they probably didn't think that the Deku Leaf would be a good fit, so they went with a sailcloth instead. And like Humilo said, we've been talking a lot about theories in the past podcast, and we have this expression called lol geography, where
Yep.
people can go to great lengths to use geography as evidence of their theories, where actually it doesn't really matter all that much. So a lot of people have said, well, this world, or as Seth Havoc said, well, the size of the world fits because after the backstory of Skyward Sword, the island breaks loose and flies into the sky, which would mean there would be a smaller world in Skyward Sword. But I mean, the worlds get bigger all the time. We had, for instance, Ocarina of Time and Twilight Princess. They're the same world, but one is substantially larger than the other one. And if anything, what I think is that this new Zelda game, is probably going to take place in the Downfall timeline because it has the atmosphere and the feeling of the NES original games. And that, to me, speaks a lot more than a sailcloth.
Gotcha. Interesting thoughts. I mean, again, it's impossible for us to tell at this point. I think that's some interesting ideas about it. All in all, we'll probably be discussing this a lot more in the future. So, if any of you guys have ideas about the timeline and about what you think is going to take place, seriously, let us know. All right. So we have another question here. This one is from Deborah Turbine. Deborah says, do you think the original Zelda... I'm going to rephrase this from what she said. Do you think the original Zelda remake... do you think the original Zelda will be remade? If they do make it, will it be on the 3DS? Joshua, what do you think?
I think it's time for the games to be remade. I'm really personally I'm not opposed at all to them remaking both of the original games and remaking them in 3D with the same story and just trying to translate those games into a 3D world. I think that's a great idea. I don't know if they will. Nintendo has a tendency to not want to remake things. It's taken us years just to get Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask remade, and I think those are the only Zelda games that have been remade. They did an updated version of Link's Awakening back in 2000, I guess that was. Maybe it was 1998. But aside from that, they haven't ever really remade Zelda games. I wish they would. Again, A Link Between Worlds was originally a remake of A Link to the Past, and they tend to make new games that have similarities instead of remaking old games. And so if they remake it, I think the 3DS is a good bet, but I don't know that Nintendo's actually going to do that.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, they're definitely not that keen on doing remakes for most of the Zelda games. Like you said, there's only been a few, and the few that we've had have been awesome, but I think of all the most deserving would be the original games, just because there's a lot to improve upon. Not necessarily from a gameplay perspective, but from things like controls. How frustrating is it that you can only have one item at a time in the original games, for example, when today we have so many more buttons, we can have so many more items. Personally, I think it would be awesome if we could see a remake like that, if nothing else, just gives us updated controls. So it looks like we are about to have our first guest here. We will have Amanda joining us, and let's see what Amanda has to say. And she's going to be talking about whether the move to get closer to the NES games will be profitable for Nintendo or not. It's definitely a very relevant question considering Nintendo's current financial status. Despite the Wii U having a lot of good games, especially a lot of good exclusive games, it really has not taken off yet. So, Amanda, how are you tonight?
Hey, good. How are you doing?
Doing pretty good. Welcome to the show, and let's hear from you. What is it? What's your question?
Okay, so I was wondering what you guys thought as far as
Actually, Amanda, hold on there 1 second. Looks like we had a little audio thing here. Sorry, 1 second. Yeah,
Okay, I think I'm
there we go.
unmuted now. Yeah,
Okay, good. Sorry about that. Continue.
That's okay. Okay, so A Link Between Worlds was really great, and it went back to the traditional top-down style of like A Link to the Past and all that. How do you think that would affect Nintendo's business strategy and sales if they continued along those lines of doing more of the traditional style games, but with like the 3D touch that they did with the 3DS, as opposed to like the big open games like they're doing with Wii U?
Personally, it's a little bit hard to say just because we see a game like Link Between Worlds be incredibly successful, and I think that's large in part because it was familiar. At the same time, there's been a lot of games that have not been as well received for being too familiar, not necessarily in the Zelda series, but in other series. But if we look at an example like Skyward Sword, Skyward Sword was not as well received as it could have been because it was pretty drastically different, to be quite honest. And I think if they were to go with something that is a little bit more familiar, like A Link Between Worlds, that could definitely help move things along. And the only issue, though, is I don't see them ever doing that on the Wii U. So
Right.
I think it would be good. I think it would, continue to make the 3DS as successful as it is. But where I think that would be really important, and what I'm happy that Zelda U is becoming, is for them to put that same kind of familiarity and classic type of gameplay, not necessarily the look or the feel, but at least the way the game actually played with what they're doing on the Wii U Zelda. So,
That makes sense.
yeah, and I think for someone like myself, to be quite honest, people that are in the like 24 to 30 bracket, somewhere in that or older, that are used to the old games, I think a game like Zelda U is really going to appeal to them, especially to people like who like games like Skyrim, for example. I mean, that comparison's been drawn over and over again. The Elder Scrolls series is widely successful for what it is, so I think it's going to have more to do with how successful those types of games are now than it's going to have to do with being closer to what the NES games necessarily. So, what about you, Joshua? What do you think about that?
Personally, I really like the 2D style Zelda games. I was afraid that the Minish Cap was going to be the last one and we would never see them again.
Yeah.
So I was very, very happy when A Link Between Worlds came out. And I think we've seen a lot more of that in other game series lately. New Super Mario Brothers is a good example. And that game has made a lot of money for Nintendo. So, I mean, I think when they're trying to, for lack of a better term, when they want to appeal to the core gamers, to nowadays something like Zelda Wii U is going to appeal more with the big open world. But if they want to expand the audience more and grab more of the casual audience, going back to something that was more like the games that we may have played when we were growing up might capture that and be easier for them to pick up and play, as opposed to a game like Skyrim where you sink hours and hours and hours into it and never really finish it, as opposed to something like Super Mario Brothers or the original Legend of Zelda that is fairly simple to just pick up and play for a little bit.
Now, I'm not going to lie. I wouldn't exactly call the original Zelda game too simple, because I did think
it's a difficult game, and you can spend
a lot
of
of hours into that. And let me tell you, I just found out, literally, I'm not even joking here, I only just last year found out that there was warp stations in the first Zelda game with the staircases. I had no idea.
For years.
Because I would just explore, look around, and I was constantly finding new stuff, but then eventually I was just going through a playthrough, and I'm like, I'm just gonna burn this bush down, and there's a freaking warp station right there, and I'm like, holy cow, I did not know about this. So, but again, I'm happy to see them kind of returning to that with Zelda Wii U, and I think that is going to be really good for Nintendo on a lot of fronts, because if you look at the Wii U's games, most of them have been more, I would say, more tiered towards the hardcore audience, not necessarily in the characters types. Like, it's still Mario, it's still Pikmin, it's still Zelda, but they've been a lot more focused on what most gamers expect games to be, and less focused on reaching out to a wider market, at least in my opinion, like the Wii was.
Right.
All right. Amanda, do you have any other questions for us today?
That's pretty much what the main question I was going to ask. No, there was one other. My first game, Zelda game, was Ocarina of Time. My nephew's first game was A Link Between Worlds. My husband's first Zelda game was the original. What would you consider the ultimate first Zelda game? If you were just starting out for the very first time, what would be the best one to start with?
Well, I say it depends largely on the person, on themselves, and that will give them a few choices. Personally, right now, I believe A Link Between Worlds to be probably the best Zelda experience that can be given, especially to a new person, because it takes everything from the old games and puts it in a more accessible package. If the person is a little bit not into top-down games and more wants a full 3D experience, honestly, Ocarina of Time is a great place to start, and it's rated right now as the best game of all time for a reason. I don't necessarily agree with that. Don't hate me in the comments, but people do love it, and so I think those are good experiences. My first was A Link to the Past, and that was pretty much the first of what made the core Zelda experience, and while I would normally recommend that one, I feel like Link Between Worlds refined that much better. Well, Amanda, thank you very much for coming on. It was a pleasure having you.
Thanks, guys. Always happy to talk to y'all.
All right. We'll see you later.
See ya.
See ya.
All right. So, Joshua, I'm going to have you on this one. We've got a question from Snowing Hammers, who asks, how do you think the new Zelda hacks are going to be like with all the new things Nintendo is doing? And that's probably in relation to Nintendo's statement that they're going to whitelist fan projects, essentially not take them down immediately.
I mean, I think Nintendo's still been a little bit vague about fan projects and what's actually going to be allowed, especially outside Japan. But, I mean, I think that we've already reached a point where, when you find glitches in games, they tend to be patched out. And if people are going to hack in and find whatever they're going to find, I think there's a good chance that Nintendo will fix it so that they can't do it anymore. Whatever that entails, I'm not real technical on that point, but I don't think Nintendo's at a point where they really want people doing that. Project M's probably the most high-profile fan project that hasn't been completely shut down.
Right.
And I think Nintendo's kind of accepted that it exists, but I still don't think they really like it. So I mean, there was even a patch just recently for the 3DS, I believe it was, that someone had found a way to put homebrew content on it, and they patched it out to prevent it from going on. So I think Nintendo's still pretty committed to not letting you actually hack into or manipulate their hardware and their software. When they want to let you do fan projects, it's something that fans are actually doing, not manipulating their game or promoting their game, whether that's through Let's Plays or making your own little fan game or whatever, but not actually changing what they've already released.
Gotcha. All right. So yeah, lots of good things so far. Again, anyone out there who does have something they want to say, please go ahead and join in. The link is in the description to come into the show. So next question that we have here is from Jacob, and let's see, where did it go? Yes. He says, in Ocarina of Time 3D, they added the Gossip Stone that shows you what to do. What do you think Nintendo will add into Majora's Mask 3D? Can we expect its return? And in addition to that, I guess we can also talk about what other changes we can expect to see in Majora's Mask. So, personally, I think that the Sheikah Stone, I think it's called, will return for Majora's Mask just as a way to help people, especially in this game, because Majora's Mask is a much, much less linear game than Ocarina of Time was, and people are probably going to get lost a lot quicker. I mean, it could be that they won't be that into the side quests, but then again, Majora's Mask is all about the side quests. Yeah, that's like the main thing about it, which is what makes it such a brilliant game and sets it apart from the rest of the series, is that it's just all about you just going around and checking out people's lives, which is amazing. As for other changes, I think I think there might be a little bit fine-tuning on the Bomber's Notebook, honestly. It's already a really great tool, but I think something like having that as a constant screen on the DS could be something that could even help out, just so you can see on the timeline that the Bomber's Notebook provides exactly when the next event's coming up, so you don't have to be constantly checking it. Just like ease of use stuff like that. What about you, Joshua?
Well, I think the Sheikah Stone, I do think it will return. I mean, they've already made it once. You would think it'd be fairly simple for them to put the same feature into another game that they've already designed and developed previously. But I do think that kind of fits in with the way Nintendo's just been going recently. It started in the Wii era, and it's continued now, even with the more core-focused titles we've seen the last couple of years. They put in features to make it easy for people that aren't core gamers. And I think the Sheikah Stone is that feature for Zelda. We saw a similar feature in Skyward Sword also. So I think that those kind of features are around to stay. Really, A Link Between Worlds had a hint feature as well. It was a little bit different, but I think we're going to see Nintendo continue to do that for the foreseeable future in just about all of their major releases. Just to be able to make a game that appeals to a core audience and still let newcomers be able to figure it out and have a good time. As far as new features, I had not heard that Bomber Notebook idea before, but I really like it and I really want it. I can kind of picture it as being a notification if you've agreed to meet Andrew at the inn at 12 o'clock tonight, that at 11 o'clock or something it reminds you, or you can see on the bottom maybe there's a timeline or a calendar there showing you when your appointments are, more or less, that you need to go complete. And I think that would be a good change. It's also been talked about, and I think we've talked about it on the show before, is the idea of being able to change the time a little better, as opposed to just, you could already warp between 12-hour periods, but being able to pick a time and do it that way, as opposed to having to stand around and wait for the postman to deliver the letter to Cafe, and those kind of things. I mean, I've spent a very long time doing the Cafe and Anju quest, and just standing around waiting for things to happen, because there's not a better way to do it.
Gotcha, yeah. So, I mean, all in all, just like with Ocarina of Time, I doubt there's going to be like any huge groundbreaking changes, at least to the gameplay perspective. But we will at least see a few things to increase playability, and that probably won't be too intrusive to everything else. The biggest change in Ocarina of Time was probably the whole water temple guides that they had there. So I think in Majora's Mask it's going to be mostly the same, but with probably a Sheikah Stone returning, maybe a few other things for ease of use, but that's probably about it. All right, and it looks like we have another guest incoming. So while we are having them come in, let's see what other questions we have here. So, question is, what do you think? This is from Master Morden on Twitter. He says, what do you think of the prevalent theory that this link is related to the Gerudo? I don't know how prevalent that theory is, because this is the first time I'm hearing of it. And
I've heard the theory. There have been a lot of comparisons drawn to some of the symbolism they've seen in the Wii U game so far, even with the little bit we have. Especially the early one was the gloves that Link is wearing appear very similar to Ganondorf's gloves in Ocarina of Time. And so those things, I mean, I don't know if there's a whole lot to it, or if Nintendo's not just using some similar designs. Nintendo focuses on some details, but I think the idea that the hero is a Gerudo, the one male Gerudo that's born every 100 years, is a bit of a stretch. I mean, the idea that maybe you visit the Gerudo, I mean, I hope that's true. We don't see enough of the Gerudo in the games, but I don't think Link is related to the Gerudo in any way. It could.
I don't think so either. Just because, I mean, one of the defining characteristics of Gerudo, as it was presented in the Ocarina of Time, are dark skin and red hair. And this Link has neither of those, so I don't think it would make a lot of sense in this regard. Just for that, I mean, who knows? They could be changing things up a little bit, make it a more broad race than it was in Ocarina of Time. But from just looks, he does not appear to be Gerudo. And as far as style stuff goes, I mean, it's the same people working on the games for a lot of it. So little things that were stylistic in other games will show up again. And while some things like symbols like the Sheikah eye, for example, those mean something for sure. Other things like the design of a glove, it's essentially the same thing as like saying, well, Goku from Dragon Ball Z looks like Chrono from Chrono Trigger. It's the same person doing it, same style, so it's going to be that way. All right. So we have another question here, and well, it's not so much a question as much as it is a statement. It looks like, but we're going to go ahead and talk about it anyway. And it says, let's see, from Amber Harris. I'm super excited about Majora's Mask Remake for the 3DS since I don't have a Wii U yet, and which is cool. That's awesome. I'm excited for it too. I do have a Wii U as well, and I don't know. It's a good question that comes up for Nintendo, I'm sure, as to what to make each game for, whether they're going to make it on the Wii U or make it on the 3DS. Personally, I feel like most of the stuff they're doing right now should focus on the Wii U, and they have had more games this year than they have previously, but it always feels like the 3DS just gets more constant hits than the Wii U does, at least in my opinion, from what I've seen. And the thing about Majora's Mask, I mean, it was unavoidable. If they were going to remake it, it would be remade on the 3DS because that way they can use the assets from Ocarina of Time, just like it was originally done on the 64. I mean, that's why they were able to crank out another Zelda game so quickly. They just literally copied and pasted most of the models, and were like, it's a parallel world. So that was developer speak for we cheated and just copied everything over. So,
no, and I think that's fair. I do think the 3DS library is weakening now. Not to say that there's not any good games available already, but I don't see as much on the horizon for it. Prior to them announcing Majora's Mask, I don't really know of anything else. And part of that may be because of the new 3DS, but they haven't announced a whole lot for the 3DS going into 2015. The Wii U is getting a more and more solid lineup. So, I mean, I don't think it would hurt for them, well, and I guess they already are doing it with Majora's Mask, but it wouldn't hurt for them to release more games on the 3DS now, because despite they don't want to just give up the momentum and suddenly you have a drought with no games just because they're trying to support this console that hasn't really hit it off yet.
Right. For sure. All right, so let's see here. Okay, we have a response to our Gerudo question here from Hohenheim of Light. It says, Link could somewhat be adopted into the Gerudo culture in some way. It is possible. I don't know why it would be a thing, but you never know. So, I mean, maybe Link's adopted in the Gerudo. It would make an interesting plot device, for sure, if they were to say, oh, well, Link and Ganon were raised together, and now they're enemies.
I have to come in here and say, this all reminds me of this theory, a lot of crazy theories on the Zelda Universe forums. And one of them is that Link is not, in Ocarina of Time, Link is actually not a pure Hylian, he's actually half Kokiri. I don't know how that works. I don't think there was any good evidence for it, but you know, sometimes you come across these kinds of crazy, fun little theories. They say, well, you know, you never know, could have happened. Usually that's not. I mean, we kind of get into the realm of fan fiction sometimes, where you know, something cool could have happened. You know, maybe Dark Link is actually Link's dad. I mean, who knows, right? But then, when you talk more about like theorizing, you try to actually find out the facts, what's actually canon, and you kind of need to have some credible evidence for your theories. And if you don't, then no one will.
In
No one will.
Hohenheim's defense, there is kind of a precedent for the Gerudos adopting someone into their kind of society, and that is
Yeah.
Ocarina of Time.
Yeah.
They do grant membership to Link and allow him to kind of be an honorary Gerudo of sorts. So I mean, it's not
Fair
that
enough.
it's completely
I'd say
unheard
that-
of, but
that
I do
opens
think
up
it's a
the
long
possi-
shot.
Yeah, I mean that opens up the possibility for it to be true, but that doesn't mean that it is true. I mean that's kind of like saying, well, you know, Link exists and Ganondorf exists, so maybe they were buddies. All right, that's
We
all.
have looks like we actually have another question here from Jacob Langoni again. It says, creative new items in Zelda Wii U that can be thrown in with the spinner from Twilight Princess and Beetle from Skyward Sword. So yeah, most Zelda games have some kind of cool new item that they're going to throw in, and as for this one, I think some kind of flying device would be way cool. I'm just going to say that because this world is not only massive but also very varying in the what's the word? What's the word for different levels of land? I don't know. There's some word that some geography major is going to tell me. Either way, there's mountains and there's valleys all over the place. I was just told the word is altitude. I should know that. So there's varying levels of altitude throughout this map, and I really think that some kind of flying other than the sailcloth would be way useful for that. Whether it's just like little boosts in the air or something that help you get higher, but something to do with air travel would be my best guess as to what could come in. Maybe not, but going across the whole world in Epona is not going to be fun, so I think another method of travel should be included. All right, we actually are out of time for the night, so we will unfortunately not be taking any more questions. So if we did not get to you tonight, or if you still have something after watching this that you want to talk about, we will be on again next week, same time, Wednesday at 8 o'clock Eastern Time. So please feel free to join us next week. It's been fun today, and this has been Humulos, and joining me today was
Joshua.
and over and out. Thank you, everybody.